I didn't catch them in bed. I caught something worse, the kind of secrecy that starts sounding like nothing happened. It was late, the kind of evening where the house should have felt settled. The kitchen light was still on, though dinner had been over for a while. The living room was quiet except for the low hum of the television, more background noise than entertainment. I remember standing by the counter, rinsing a mug I hadn't finished, noticing how unfamiliar my own home felt in that moment. We had invited the house guest to stay with us to help. That was the story I told everyone, including myself. It felt good to be generous, to be the kind of person who opened their home without hesitation. I remember feeling proud of that decision at first, like it said something decent about who we were. What I didn't expect was how my partner changed once he was around. They laughed more. They stayed in the room instead of drifting off with their phone. Conversations stretched longer, carried more energy. I noticed it in small ways at first, the kind you brush aside because you don't want to seem petty. A smile that lingered a second too long while looking at a screen. A voice dropping when I walked into the room. Errands that suddenly couldn't wait until morning. The houseguest was polite, almost careful. He thanked me for meals, offered to help without being asked, kept his tone respectful. There was nothing outwardly inappropriate about him, and that made it harder to explain the tension I felt. It was like he was constantly aware of how he came across, managing himself in a way that felt deliberate. I told myself I was being jealous. I reminded myself that nothing inappropriate had happened. I had no proof, no accusation to stand on. And I didn't want to be the kind of partner who saw problems where none existed. I stayed quiet because silence felt safer than asking questions I might not want the answers to. Still, there were moments that stuck with me. One night, passing the hallway, I overheard my partner say softly, "Not here," the words quick and hushed, like a boundary placed too late. Another time, I caught a glimpse of my name typed into a message preview. The phone flipped face down before I could read anything else. That was the first time I felt like a guest in my own home. Not pushed out, not replaced, just slightly out of sync, like I'd missed a step everyone else knew by heart. And that was the moment I realized they weren't trying to hide a person, they were hiding a pattern. I told myself it was innocent, until I caught myself rehearsing what I'd say if I ever found proof. If you've ever felt something shift before you could explain it, stay with me, because noticing it was only the beginning. The more I tried to ignore my suspicion, the more my own home started feeling like a stage with secret scenes. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to investigate my own relationship. It happened slowly, almost against my will. I started paying attention to things I used to overlook, not because I wanted answers, but because my body stayed tense even when I told myself to relax. The hallway became a place I lingered longer than necessary. The laundry room felt tighter somehow, like conversations passed through it before disappearing. Every space between rooms carried echoes of things I hadn't heard but somehow sensed. I began noticing inconsistencies. Small ones. The kind you can explain away if you're committed to staying comfortable. Timing that didn't line up. Excuses that sounded rehearsed. Mood shifts that appeared and vanished without explanation. My partner started volunteering for things they'd never cared about before. Grocery runs late at night. Dishes handled immediately after dinner. Extra effort that didn't extend to me, but seemed directed toward keeping the houseguests comfortable. They developed a rhythm together that I couldn't quite enter. Quiet conversations after I'd gone to bed. Shared coffee in the mornings that ended just before I walked in. Inside jokes that didn't pause for explanation. I found myself smiling along without knowing why, feeling like I'd arrived late to something already in progress. I tried small tests, things I could justify as harmless. I mentioned an upcoming event casually and watched their reactions, looking for surprise or hesitation. I entered rooms more quietly than usual, just to see if conversations stopped or shifted. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Both outcomes stayed with me longer than they should have. The evidence I found wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind you confront someone with. It was the kind that stacks quietly. A mug left on the counter at 2 a.m. when everyone was supposed to be asleep. 2 chairs angled toward each other by the patio door, closer than comfort required. A playlist saved on the television, titled something soft and personal, something that suggested time spent together after dark. That was when I admitted something I hadn't wanted to face. I wasn't just suspicious. I was being excluded. Every time I asked, my partner said the same thing. It's nothing. And every time those words left their mouth, their behavior adjusted immediately after. Phones tilted away. Conversations shortened. Plans rearranged. The reassurance felt rehearsed, like a response meant to close a door, not invite trust back in. I reached out to a friend, careful not to give details. I framed it as a general question, like I was asking for advice on behalf of someone else. She listened quietly, then said, "If you feel like you're being managed, you probably are." The words settled heavier than I expected. I still hesitated to check devices. I didn't want to become someone I didn't recognize. I wanted to believe that trust meant restraint. But the secrecy had started to bend reality. I questioned my memory, my instincts, even my tone. I wondered if I was being unreasonable or if I was slowly being convinced to doubt myself. Then one afternoon, I walked into the hallway and stopped short. They were mid-conversation. The houseguest froze, guilt written plainly across his face. My partner looked annoyed. Not startled. Not apologetic. Annoyed at me. "We were just talking," my partner said. The words sounded flat, defensive, like a warning instead of comfort. Later that night, taking out the trash, I noticed a folded piece of paper near the top. I shouldn't have looked. I did anyway. The handwriting was familiar. Only one line was still readable. "Don't stop." That was when my anxiety hardened into resolve. I wasn't looking for betrayal yet. I was looking for proof I still mattered. And then I found the one thing that changed everything, and it wasn't a text. If you think the truth always shows up clearly, stay with me, because what I found next didn't look like betrayal at all. I expected to find flirting. What I found was worse. Something careful, consistent, and already emotionally committed. I stood in the guest room doorway longer than I meant to. The light was off, the room quiet, but it felt occupied in a way I couldn't explain. Like the air had been shaped by conversations I wasn't part of. I told myself I was crossing a line just by being there, but something heavier than guilt kept my feet planted. What I found wasn't dramatic. No photos. No explicit messages. No proof that would satisfy the part of me that wanted to believe I was wrong. Instead, there were long threads of conversation that read like a slow exchange of trust. Messages about feeling alone, about being misunderstood, about having someone who finally listened. "You deserve better. I'm here. I get you." They weren't sexual. That was the worst part. They were steady, consistent, the kind of words you give someone you plan to keep. I scrolled through message after message, my hands shaking, my chest tightening with each line. The houseguest shared details about his past, his fears, things you don't tell someone casually. My partner responded with comfort and reassurance. Then quietly the focus shifted. Complaints about our relationship. About me. I read my name described as distant. Hard to talk to. Always tired. Those words weren't new fears. They were things I'd asked about. Things I tried to fix. Seeing them written out for someone else felt like watching my place in the relationship get rewritten without me present. Buried between lines of reassurance were sentences that made my stomach drop. "We're not doing anything wrong. We just can't let them know." That was when anger finally cut through the shock. If it was harmless, why hide it? If it meant nothing, why protect it so carefully? The messages didn't just show connection. They showed coordination. That was the moment the truth shifted. The worst part wasn't the bond itself. It was the effort put into keeping it separate from me. The secret had become more important than honesty. I froze, torn between confronting them immediately or continuing to read, knowing that stopping now might leave room for denial later. I hated that thought. I hated that I was already being changed by this. Then I saw a line that stopped everything. Last night almost happened. My vision blurred. I didn't know what almost meant, but I knew it was enough. Enough to erase the last thin layer of denial I'd been clinging to. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Instinct took over. I hid what I was holding, slipped the device back where I'd found it, my heart racing. In that moment, I realized I'd become what I hated most in this situation, someone hiding. That was the soft breaking point. The quiet understanding that I could never again say, "This would never happen to me." I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't dramatic. I was simply the last to know. And that's when I understood. Cheating isn't always bodies. Sometimes it's loyalty being reassigned. But what I did next is what people still judge me for. If you think knowing the truth makes the next step obvious, stay with me, because it didn't make mine any easier. I didn't scream at first. I asked one question, and the silence that followed told me I'd already lost something. Dinner was on the table, untouched. The food had gone cold, but no one mentioned it. The house felt tight, like the walls had leaned in without warning. I remember the sound of cutlery settling, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the way my own voice sounded steadier than I felt. I looked at my partner and asked, calmly, carefully, "Are you hiding something with them?" The pause was too long. Not confused. Calculated. They laughed lightly, the kind of laugh meant to soften tension. "You're imagining things," they said. Then, almost immediately, they just needed support. A beat later, the sentence they clearly believed would end it. Nothing physical happened. I waited for relief to follow those words. It didn't. Instead, my partner shifted in their chair and added that we'd been distant lately, that I'd been distracted, that the connection they felt elsewhere was a reaction, not a choice. The responsibility was gently slid across the table and placed in my lap. That's when the argument sharpened. "If nothing physical happened," I said, my voice quieter now, "then why hide it?" They didn't answer right away. They talked around it instead. Definitions, intentions, technicalities, as if meaning could be negotiated if explained slowly enough. I realized they weren't trying to understand my hurt. They were trying to win an argument. The houseguest must have heard raised voices because he appeared in the hallway, hovering just outside the room. He looked uncomfortable, careful with his words. "I didn't mean to cause problems," he said. "I care about you both." That was when I said it, that I'd seen the messages. The room shifted instantly. My partner's expression changed, not to guilt, but to anger. Sharp, defensive anger. They accused me of crossing a line, of invading privacy, of doing exactly what they claimed they hadn't, breaking trust. When they said nothing happened, I realized they were using that sentence like armor. The conversation stopped being controlled after that. The houseguest admitted the connection was real, that the conversations mattered, that it wasn't accidental. My partner admitted it made them feel seen again, alive in a way they hadn't felt in years. Then came the sentence that did the most damage. They admitted they'd shared things about me they'd never said to my face. Frustrations, doubts, private thoughts that should have stayed between us. Hearing that felt like watching my place in the relationship handed to someone else, piece by piece. The houseguest said he could leave. Immediately. He said it quickly, like an escape route. I watched my partner hesitate, just a second too long. Long enough to say everything they wouldn't. Humiliation settled in first. This had happened inside my home. Then rage. I was being framed as the problem for noticing what was real. And beneath that, grief. The realization that emotional betrayal could be defended so calmly, so logically. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," my partner said, as if the timing was the real offense. The houseguest spoke again, quieter this time. "I tried to stop it," he said, "but they kept coming back to me." Then my partner asked me for one thing, to give them time, to not make any decisions yet. And it was the moment I knew my marriage was bleeding out. "If you think confrontation brings clarity, stay with me, because what came after was quieter, and somehow even harder to survive." Justice didn't come as revenge. It came as clarity, because once I saw what they chose, I stopped begging. Morning arrived without ceremony. Light slipped through the bedroom blinds, landing on things that suddenly felt temporary. The houseguest was gone before I fully woke up. No long goodbye, no conversation, just an empty room and a quiet that felt different from the tension we'd been living in. The air didn't feel lighter exactly, just settled, like something had finally ended. My partner tried to talk, carefully at first. They repeated the same phrases like anchors. It wasn't physical. "We can fix this. You're overreacting." Each sentence asked me to negotiate my own boundaries, to accept a smaller version of trust, so things could stay familiar. I realized then that I was done arguing definitions, done debating what counted and what didn't. Trust wasn't a technicality. It was either there or it wasn't. That was the shift. I didn't need them to confess anymore. I needed to decide what I could live with. I told them I needed space. Real space, not silence under the same roof. I set boundaries that didn't come with explanations. Counseling was mentioned, but not as a rescue plan. more as a mirror we'd both need to face. I reached out to people I'd kept things from, not to gather sympathy, but to stop protecting a story that wasn't mine alone anymore. Justice didn't look like punishment. It looked like access being revoked. My partner no longer had automatic entry into my trust, my routines, my emotional labor. The normalcy they'd relied on disappeared, and I didn't rush to replace it. There was grief in that. Clean grief. The kind that hurts but doesn't confuse. Relief sat beside it, quiet but steady. I stopped competing with secrecy. Stopped trying to prove my worth to someone who'd chosen to hide. The final sting came later, when I understood something clearly. The betrayal didn't begin with feelings. It began when honesty ended. I thought it was innocent until I realized I was hiding it too, by staying quiet to keep peace. I thought that was the worst betrayal I'd ever face. Until months later, I learned how long the secret lifestyle had really been running, and who else knew that if this story stayed with you. Subscribe to True Lies Diaries for more real confessions that don't look the way you expect.